Bigger fish.
Get ready. You're listening to Give God 90 live.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Welcome everyone to Give God 90. We are live on a Thursday night, and for those of you on Facebook, you can actually see we have one extra person with us tonight. For those on Spreaker and all the other podcast outlets we have, my name is Jerry Mitchell. My wife Myra is here, and our special guest Pamela Laurion, who just landed a week ago back from Saudi Arabia and the land of Moses, the land of Midian. And we are extremely excited. First, before we get into her experience, let us remind you can download the Give God 90 app, and you might want to do that because if you do, you can then download this on the podcast system. You'll have the audio of it whenever you want to go listen to it. So if you hear something and you say, well, I think I've heard that before, then you know where to go get it. The other thing, if you haven't visited the website lately, make sure you go to the website, and there's all kinds of neat things on there. And
hi, Sean. Welcome.
Oh, hey, Sean. You're on already. Cool. If you haven't been following our Mondays, you might want to do that because we are, I'll be honest, I don't like teaching Revelation, but I've started in Revelation, and you're going to learn things because I have learned things. And some of the things you're going to find out if you listen to those things, if you listen to our Monday podcast, and it's not on Facebook, it's podcast only, because I get to go into some detail and depth. So get ready for a ride, because it's a roller coaster on this one. All right, so let's introduce Pam Laurion, who lives not too terribly far from here. Not too far. But you just had the experience of a lifetime.
I did. I
did. You've been to Saudi Arabia.
Went to Saudi Arabia.
And the REAL Mount Sinai.
So
before we get into that experience, I want to know, and I know our listeners want to know, why did you want to go?
Well, I had researched Jabal laws for well over a decade, and was convinced, and still am convinced, that it is the real Mount Sinai, and that the ruins there are where the story of the Exodus took place and where God spoke to Israel from the mountain. So I had done extensive amounts of studying, and in fact, a couple years ago, my friend and I, we decided to go to Israel, but we decided to go to Egypt first, and we wanted to go to Nuweiba Beach, where the crossing of the Red Sea had taken place, and knowing that we couldn't make it to Saudi Arabia because the government had shut down tourism in that country. So that was not going to happen, and many people have tried to go there and have been arrested, jailed, risked their lives to go and see this area, and were unable to get a lot of documentation until recently. So I spent a great deal of time in prayer, desiring to see the mountain. Went through Egypt and through Nuweiba and up through Eilat, not going to Saudi Arabia, but looking at the mountains from across the water and wanting to go. And when my friend Joni and I returned in September, on September 27th, the Saudi prince lifted the restrictions for tourist visas in Saudi Arabia the day that we returned. after several years of prayer. So I was back in the United States, and I didn't see the story until about 2 weeks later.
Right. So, when the Saudi prince started coming out with us, because you were in Egypt and Israel for 3 weeks or 4 weeks.
We were there for 4 weeks.
So that's when all that started to develop.
Yes.
And it was really kind of interesting for us sitting here going, well, are they going from Israel to Saudi, or are they coming back here first? Because we really didn't know. And, as we're looking at this and watching these things develop, we're glad you came back, because that actually gave you a chance to kind of calm down and then let the momentum start building for your return trip to Saudi Arabia.
Hi, Jay. Hi,
and everybody.
Tina. Hi, Carol.
So, and we are so happy that you had the opportunity to do this. I mean, it is...
Overjoyed.
Now, for the folks listening on Spreaker, you actually brought us back a couple of presents. We'll get to that in just a little bit. And the folks on Spreaker that can't see us, we just, stick with us. We're going to try and describe these things to you as best we can.
Yes.
Because we know that sometimes when you go somewhere, it's visual, but this is going to don't be discouraged. We're going to try and describe these things to you the best we can. Now we know you went to the Split Rock, right?
I did.
And from there you went to Jethro's Caves.
We went to Jethro's Caves.
And then you went on to the mountain.
That is correct.
So let me kind of ask, from your experience, how much is there to learn from this area?
Well, the area is untouched for thousands of years. So what you see is the ruins in their unadulterated state. There's no church or there's no temple on top of these things. They are left as they were left in the day of Moses. So you actually get to see the unhewn stones on the altar of Moses. You get to see the 12 pillars, which are still there. You get to see the 3,000 graves that are off to the side, the 3,000 that were buried away from the mountain and away from the camp. You can see the altar of the golden calf. You can see the petroglyphs. You can see Elijah's cave, and the burnt top of the mountain. So these spots are untouched, and so they speak for themselves. So there's been very little disturbance of these places.
And you're actually, when you're there, you're in the wilderness.
You are in the wilderness.
I mean, there's no doctor next door. There's no hospital right around the corner. You're out in there.
Yes.
So it is a wilderness experience. I guided elk hunts in Colorado, and I would tell my hunters when they would come in, you're 2 hours away from medical attention.
Exactly.
And where we wound up was actually sometimes 4 hours away from medical attention. So you're in the same situation.
You're in the same situation. Scripture calls it the backside of the desert. And very few people live there. There are herds of wild camels. There are no roads. There is just sand, dunes, rocks, and mountains. Very little plant life. And it's a very intimate and quiet place.
Good. Now, you and this tour you were with did a lot of photography. You were doing a lot of things. The petroglyphs and the markings that are on the rocks there. Describe for us the different types there are.
I'd like to distinguish between the petroglyphs and the pictographs. Pictographs are more letters, ancient Hebrew letters, versus the petroglyphs, which are drawings on the rocks and the caves. And the drawings near the split rock, near the golden calf altar, are quite Egyptian in nature. They're decorated, and they're decorated differently, and they don't look like regular domesticated herding animals. There are also several petroglyphs that show the worshiping of these bulls, Egyptian in nature, where human beings are actually suckling from these calves and worshiping these calves. And so Scripture says, "These are your gods, O Israel." He uses a plural, and so there are many of them. So
Now,
it is true to Scripture in that description.
and he's probably being very specific to the Egyptian gods Hathor and Apis.
Correct.
So because the male and female
Correct.
cow or bovine gods
Correct.
of Egypt. When the Almighty came down on top of that mountain and turned it black, he gave some very specific instructions not to do the very things that they were doing. They were participating in.
Exactly.
So, is it any wonder that he was extremely upset
Very
when he
upset.
sees this going on? But there's other markings there as well on the rocks that are extremely significant.
They are, and they're found. A lot of them are found at the Split Rock at Horeb, which is right around on the other side of the range. It's actually on the north end side of the range, and God told Moses, "Go to the rock at Horeb." So it's a significant place. It's not a small boulder. It was a known place to Moses, and it was a significant rock because Moses knew where it was.
Just like a sign along a highway.
Exact. Go to the rock at Horeb.
Right.
So it is where Moses went, and this is a magnificent rock that stands about 60 feet tall, and Moses struck it, and the water poured forth, and it gushed forth. The evidence there is just overwhelming for water coming out of this thing. But on the backside of this rock, there is a ledge that opens up, that divides a long plain, and on this high ledge, it is riddled, rock after rock, with petroglyphs and pictographs. Often, what I think is what is a battle scene. You see the archers, the horses. Some would argue it's a hunting scene, but I can tell you there's nothing to hunt out there. And
3,500 years ago, you get 1 million people or 2 million people walking through the desert. The animals aren't going to be there anyway. They're going to scatter.
And so you see petroglyph after petroglyph of these scenes, and you also see pictographs of the soles of the feet and the letter Kaf next to them, which is 3 hash marks, and it stands for the letter Kaf, and it means the sole of the foot or the sole of the hand. And so that is the fulfillment of the promise that God gave Abraham: wherever the soles of your feet shall touch, that land I will give you. So wherever the Israelites went, they remember that covenant, and they would put the sole of the foot. So you can actually see the footprints along with the Kaf sign. And there was one pictograph that I was able to rock with several of them that talked about the journey of the sole of the foot. So it was very exciting for me because I was able to get those pictures and bring them back, able to decipher them. And it was clear to me as I was up on that ledge that as Moses stood on that ledge, he was able to lift his arms, and God was able to use Moses' arms to battle the Amalekites in that area. So it was quite spectacular.
Absolutely. And I have told this to you. I don't know if I've told it to anybody else, but that rock that is split from top to bottom.
It's top to bottom.
And there has to be, in my mind, a connection between that rock being split from top to bottom and the curtain of the temple that was torn from top to bottom at the death of Yeshua.
Yes.
So what that connection is, I'm going to leave that up to you to figure out, because I've got other things on my mind.
Those are other lessons to do. But the water poured forth, and often Yeshua will talk about him being poured forth. Mm-hmm. So, and Paul describes this rock as the water as being the Christ. Mm-hmm. And so in that moment, as the water poured forth, the representation of Messiah and the representation of our Father is right there. And it's quite a spectacular rock. Mm-hmm. It is 60 feet high, but it's up on a 100-foot hill. So it's a a scary climb up there, but quite worth the climb.
Absolutely. And if anybody's wondering, if you're wondering where that's found in the Bible, I believe that starts in Exodus chapter 17.
Mm-hmm.
So from there forwards, what we're going to be really talking about,
Right.
because those footprints that you're talking about are not just in this area. They actually follow the trail that the Israelites followed around the land that was given to them.
Right. And they're actually found all over the Middle East.
Yeah.
So those footprints still exist to this day, and they mark that territory.
Yep. It is absolutely amazing. Now, the topography there is, a lot of times people talk about, well, in fact, Tim Mahoney's movie, some of the Egyptologists say, well, there's only, maybe 4,000 or 5,000 people that were there. Mm-hmm. But we read about them filling up this valley.
Right.
And it's huge.
It's huge. It's a huge valley. So
the topography there as it lays out, would it have been big enough to be a camp for, I don't know, 1 million or 2 million people?
Absolutely. It just spreads out and several miles across and several miles deep, and no doubt that area would have supported that type of population. The topography is very rocky and has a lot of boulders up toward the mountain. But when you get away from the mountain, it levels itself out and goes out into a plain. There are some ridges, that define certain areas, but it certainly can support that population.
Good. Now we read a very interesting part, or something that I think is interesting, that happens out there where the tabernacle would have been placed. Mm-hmm. And that is where the ground opens up and swallows those who were followers of Korach.
Yes.
Is there anything in that area that would indicate the ground opening up and then closing?
There are ridges that you can see where the boulders have the land has ridged up a little bit. Mm-hmm. So you'll have a 20-foot drop or ridges. So quite possibly, I didn't think about that when I was there, but I think that is absolutely possible.
Isn't it amazing that the rocks are crying out? Now, we do know that there was an earthquake there because it's recorded. So as you're looking at this area, I know you described the rocks from the top of the mountain. Some of them have actually made their way now. And it's been 3,000 years.
Exactly.
So as time progresses and storms happen, earthquakes happen, what is the layout of the land from Moses' altar area going up towards the top of the mountain?
Well, in 1 Kings, I think it's 1 Kings, where Elijah is at his cave. He goes to Sinai, and God asks him what he's doing there. And there's an earthquake, and so these boulders and these rocks fall down, and that's evidence because the former paths are covered. Mm-hmm. So getting to the top of the mountain is extremely dangerous. So dangerous that there were several members of our team that had climbed Everest, and they were specifically chosen for this expedition to do the climbing. Mm-hmm. And as they went up, the first stop was at Elijah's cave, where they found a cobra inside the cave. So there was a lot of prayer there, but it was difficult to climb up. What you think would be an easy climb is not. These boulders are big, they are loose, and they are dangerous. Going from there, the one guy stayed behind. The additional 3 climbers went up to the pinnacle of Jabal al-Lawz, and while they were up there, one of the hikers got extremely ill, dehydrated and sick. So it was very dangerous. But we had to send a rescue person up there to get them, and it took all day. But the the topography is very rocky. It's dangerous. There are 20, 50-foot drops, so it becomes difficult. But they did come to the meadow where the 70 elders had been, and they were able to make it up to the pinnacle. And amazingly, at the top of the mountain, which seems so far off, they were able to hear everything down in the valley. So they could hear the chorus, the four-wheelers that were down there, the people, they could hear the voices. So easily, it was like a sound stage, and Moses would have easily heard everything that was going down in the valley.
That's amazing. I see Francisco's joined us. We're glad to see him. I think I've seen Tina on there too.
Yeah,
didn't I?
Tina's
Okay.
watching too.
Okay.
Hi, Tina.
So
Hi,
want to make sure that we
Francisco.
say hi to everybody. And thank you all for joining us and listening in. And I know we have a lot of folks that kind of join incognito. So we appreciate that too. Talking with Pam Laurion, who just got back from Saudi Arabia. And my big question, are you absolutely convinced this is the real Mount Sinai?
Yes. There's no question that the proximity of these archaeological finds, the nature of these finds, the character of these finds, the way the unhewn stone is at the altar, which is almost marks it as a Hebraic site, the petroglyphs, the 12 wells at Elam, the palm trees at Elam, the graveyard, the split rock. The proximity of all these sites is not just happenstance. It's you don't have to be a rocket science to understand that if you know a little bit of biblical history, that this is where this story took place. When you're standing at Moses' altar and you're putting your hands on the 12 pillars that are still there, there's no doubt.
That, along with the animal chutes that are there, everything else there that just cries out, this is where this happened.
This is where this happened.
I think I was convinced of this a long time ago when I first saw the pictures that Jim and Penny Caldwell snuck out of there under cover of darkness and
risking their lives.
And risking their lives and jail and everything else. This area has been protected for a very long time.
Yes, it has.
And that's about to change.
That's about to change.
The Prince of Saudi Arabia has lifted the visa restriction even to Israel. But I did see today that they are not allowing pilgrimages to Mecca during the coronavirus outbreak.
That is correct.
So, that's kind of slowed things up a little bit. But anyway, I don't think there was any tours scheduled for this particular period of time anyway, is there?
There was a tour that got back last night.
Okay.
To DC, Washington DC. There was one tour that immediately followed my tour. So Bob Cornuke is on that tour as well. So there will probably not be another tour till the fall.
Right.
And then they're also planning cruises to that area where they will start at the Suez and do Avaris in Egypt and then circle around the Sinai and hit the spots of Jabal Allah's, Elam, and then go on up into Petra as well. So those are things that are starting to happen. The change is taking place in northwest Saudi Arabia. The city of Neom is being built. It is going to be 33 times the size of New York City. And it is huge. And they've already started. The roads and the infrastructure has already been starting to put in place. The design of the small villages as welcoming conglomerates for this area. And Neom is in place. And so my fear is that a lot of these archaeological sites will disappear. At Elam, when we went, there are 12 wells, and there are cement rings around each of the wells. And although the cement rings are modern, they mark the wells and they protect the wells. Well, some of those had already been pulled up, so the wells are disappearing. So those things won't be there for much longer. My fear is that we'll lose some of these sites.
For the folks who don't know, the city of Neom is described and advertised as going to be the absolute most modern city in the world. Extremely high tech, to the point where every apartment in the city is going to be like a smart house. So, if you use your milk and you put it back on the refrigerator shelf, your refrigerator will automatically order milk from the store for you. That's how modern and high tech this place is supposed to be. They've already financed the first $5 billion, with a B like in boy, not million, $5 billion for this. And they're starting.
It's already started. It's already started.
This is not a small undertaking. It's going to be huge, and it's definitely going to change the feeling of that area.
Well, it's going to change the whole dynamics of that area. The Saudis call it the 2030 plan. So they're hoping that the 10-year plan will produce this large city or area and be a productive for Saudi Arabia. So, but definitely in the works. We saw it firsthand, and it does threaten these sites. Again, going to the backside of the desert, where it's very, very where you're in the wilderness and the paved road ends, it will creep into that area as well.
I did see an article on, I think it was from Great Britain last week, that mentioned Saudi Arabia is gearing up. They expect somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 million tourists in the next 10 years.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Some of those are going to be Christian. Some of them are going to be Muslim. Some of them are going to be Jewish, I'm sure. Some, so their tourist industry, they're really ready to jumpstart.
They are.
They're training people to accept tourist industry. But I'm wondering about the people in the area you were in. Now, you landed in which city?
We landed in the capital, Riyadh.
Okay.
And from Riyadh, we flew to a city called Tabuk.
Okay.
And it's on the very south section of Midian. And from there, we drove up into Midian, along the Gulf of Aqaba and the Red Sea, where we've stayed at a hotel and then would use that as our jumping off point every night to go back to. So, and we would take the 4 wheels into the desert. So, the locals, although the Saudi people are very, very gracious and hospitable, some of the locals, especially around in the backside of the desert, are a little rough because they don't want their way of life threatened. And so they feel it's their duty to protect these sites. And so it's sort of split, that whole feeling of can a tourist come here or can a tourist not come here? The whole feeling, it's just sort of split between the population depending on who you're talking to. And you really do have to be careful. So the Saudis like to keep a keen eye on everybody that comes in there. So you sort of have to walk and play their game a little bit.
Sure. When you're going to these sites that we consider them archaeological sites.
Yes.
The people in that area consider them their backyard.
Exactly.
So we're basically looking at, here the area I grew up in is trespassing on somebody's backyard. Mm-hmm. So yeah, you do have to kind of abide by their
yes.
things, their laws, their regulations, and the way they do things, and respect their way of life.
Yeah.
Because actually, we can actually take that back to a threshold covenant. they've opened this up. They're saying, come in. We've been knocking on the door. Now they're saying, come in. And part of the threshold covenant agreement is, while I'm in the protection of your house, I have to obey your rules.
Exactly.
So that works that way too.
Yes. In fact, the rules are changing so rapidly in Saudi Arabia, especially for tourists, because we were sent an abaya to wear for our tour. And an hour before I got on my flight, we received an email that tourist women coming into Saudi Arabia do not have to wear abayas or burqas. So I did not have to wear the abaya the whole time I was there, nor did I have to keep my head covered. So tourist women have a lot more freedom. One thing I was conscious about was keeping the arms covered and being conservative, which is always important. But
Right.
Those rules are rapidly changing in Saudi.
And that's not all bad.
That's
not all bad. We are kind of all, and I hate to use the phrase citizens of the world, but we're neighbors. We really are, and we need to respect each other, even though we don't agree with
Yes.
each other all of the time. That's one of the things that we do. So, now, something that happened, you had well, let's just say a very able-bodied accompanying person with you, right?
Yes, I did.
Who did you take with you?
I took my grandson. I actually took my grandson at the begging of my daughter and her husband. I took my 12-year-old grandson to Saudi Arabia. And while we were at the mountain, we were halfway between the altar of Moses and the altar of the golden calf. We were halfway in between. And he climbed this boulder mountain, that hill that was there. It was quite large, and was up playing on the rocks and found a cave with a whole wall of petroglyphs inside. So these petroglyphs had never been discovered before, so he got the documentation on that discovery.
Is it now called the Cave of Alden?
It could be. It could be. But he was thrilled. He was changed his life of that
I would hope
moment to make your first archaeological discovery at the age of 12.
At the age of 12. I know you have said before that most kids, when they go through their bar mitzvah at that age, they get a hotel and
The bagel party at the Holiday Inn.
Right.
Yeah, he gets to go to Mount Sinai.
So, how life-changing can that be for a young person? I mean, I know how life-changing it is for you, and you're kind of our age, so I can see that. But to be his age, and when you look in his eyes now, there's no way he can be the same person as when he first stepped on that airplane to go over there.
Right. When you're 12, you're learning the Word of God. You're learning those stories. You're learning those things. And as a parent, as a grandparent, the command is to tell your children, to tell your children, to tell their children for all generations what I have done for you. So that was my hope, that I would be able to tell my grandchildren that what the Father has done for you. And as he put his hands on the pillars, and as he put his hands on the altar of Moses, and as he walked around the altar of the golden calf and was able to see those things, he will never be able to deny that story did not exist. It is proof positive that for him that is a true story, and he had the opportunity to put his hands on those items that were still available for him to touch.
Mm-hmm. I know it is absolutely thrilling. You brought back what I will describe as dirt.
Sort of.
From three very special places. You brought us back a little bit of dirt from the area of the Split Rock.
I did.
And from the Elijah's Cave.
Elijah's Cave.
But you didn't go to Elijah's Cave. You
No,
had somebody.
But my friend brought me back some
dirt.
Some dirt.
Okay. And then from the altar of Moses.
From the altar of Moses.
The burnt rock from the altar of Moses. Yes. I think I can say that.
Yes, you can.
Without getting you in trouble.
Yes. You can actually say what you need to say.
Okay. I don't want to cause problems for anybody who goes over there in the future either, because I know along the coast where we live, they're trying to get us to stop taking seashells off the beach.
Right.
So, that's kind of one of those touristy things that they do. And that's one way that they discourage people from going, is to say, no, you can't take anything from this area.
Yeah.
But at the same time, these things are so important. These things are so, and this is going to sound funny, but I would put more emphasis, more prudence on what you brought back than I would a moon rock.
For me, in my heart, yes. Just to have the opportunity to pick things up off the ground and put them in my pocket and then sort it out later was such a joy. And we really didn't have the opportunity to buy anything in Saudi Arabia. We were in the wilderness for 3 or 4 days. We didn't have the opportunity, even in the major cities, we just didn't have opportunities. So the samples that I brought back were more precious to me than anything I could have bought, and will always be. And I felt like I had half of Mount Sinai in my pocket.
So you can go there, you can do that, but you literally cannot buy the T-shirt because there's no place to buy one and none to buy.
Correct.
Right?
There's no vendors. There's not even a place to get a soda or water. You are in the middle of a wilderness, so you haul in and you haul out. So,
which is a good thing, because we've seen what has happened in Israel. We've seen what's happened in Egypt. I know you described, because you were at Mount Sinai on the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt.
Yes.
Where they have the burning bush with a fire extinguisher sitting next to it in case it ever happens again.
Yeah. The rumor is that the story is they used to keep a fire extinguisher by the burning bush at St. Catherine's in the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt. But when Joni and I arrived at St. Catherine's, the disappointment was overwhelming, knowing that it didn't fit any of the biblical account, and we walked away tongue in cheek, knowing that was not what was there.
Right. Jay just commented on Facebook, no mosquitoes. You've got to have water to have mosquitoes, and there's none in the desert.
None.
So I know from the pictures that I've seen that you brought back, it is very evident. The split rock at Rephidim had a huge amount of water come out of there.
It is.
In a very short amount of time.
In fact, they trenched the water. So they built, you can actually see, and I took pictures of this. One of the things that they had asked our team, there were 18 members of the team, was to document everything that we could, because things were disappearing. There had already been some pictographs that had disappeared behind the split rock, and somebody had sprayed over them. So they wanted pictures and documentation, get as much documentation as you could. But in front of the split rock where the water poured forth, there was actually, you can see a trench line built right coming down the hill, and where they directed the flow of the water. So that was very exciting to see that. And I was able to, that's what that is. So,
yeah. I know just from the pictures you've shown me so far, there is just overwhelming evidence. And one of the verses we were talking about a while ago was, well, you shared from John, was that 20?
20. John 20.
20 something, about where Yeshua is talking to Timothy, and he says, you believe because you have seen, and blessed is he who believes that has not seen.
That has not seen.
And a lot of times we get people talking about, well, faith is the evidence of, faith is, you got to have blind faith, and I keep saying faith is evidence. Faith is absolute evidence of things that you might not be able to see, but it's there.
It's there.
We can't, most parts of the world you can't see air, but without it you can't breathe.
You can't.
Just because people have not seen Mount Sinai doesn't mean it's not there.
It doesn't mean it's not there.
I had a fellow ask me one time, well, if I can't see it, I don't believe it. And I asked him, well, have you ever been to Australia? And he said, well, no, I've never been to Australia. I've never left the United States. I said, well, how do you know it's there? So we have to be careful how we say these things and how you present things like that to people, because I know there are still people who want to argue that that's not Mount Sinai. That's not this. That couldn't have happened there. There are atheists out there who say, no, God couldn't have done all this. But there is no way that I can look at there's no way I can read Scripture and put Scripture into archaeology and you not say, this is absolutely the way it is.
The evidence there is overwhelming. And again, I had studied this mountain for a number of years and was very much convinced that this is where this event happened. And so my desire to see it just continually drove me to study and want to go there. And I jumped at the first chance I could get. So, but I can tell you that in my heart and in everyone on that expedition, there was no doubt. And there were learned men on this expedition. There were learned people on this expedition. No doubt in my mind or their minds that this is where this event took place.
Well, that's good. That's good to know. Is there anything else you want to add to what we've discussed?
I believe that the future of Mount Sinai, the Father has protected this mountain for millennium. It is His mountain. And it is my prayer and hope, and I'm confident the Father will continue to do so. If anyone gets a chance to go there, it is a trip of a lifetime. I didn't feel unsafe at all. And so the world is changing there. And I think because we are nearing the end times, so to speak, those things are going to open up and they're going to be revealed and the rocks will cry out.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think they're crying out right now. It's like, hey, look here. Look at what we've got. Pam, I know that there's going to be people who are going to send questions. So at some point in the future, I'd love to have you back to answer some of those.
I would love to.
And because it has certainly been a pleasure having you here with us this evening. I know that the folks who are listening and who will listen eventually, because I still get, I don't want to say freaked out, but it still sounds weird when people say, well, I didn't get a chance to watch you live, but I watched you on reruns. So that happens every once in a while, and there are people who are probably sleeping right now in another part of the world who will see this or listening to this later, and they will probably have questions as well. We reach, quite honestly, I don't know how many people a week now, because the last statistics I saw, I couldn't believe. I was like, there's got to be something wrong with this. So, but anyway, we're reaching people. We're trying to tell people that these things are real. These things happen.
These things are real.
And our response to this should be to say, oh, wow, God's there. He designed me. Maybe I should live the way He gives me the opportunity to live, the way He designs me to live.
In fact, the graveyard where the 3,000 were buried and killed for worshiping the golden calf, they are outside of the camp and out of view of the pinnacle of the mountain. So you're either in the camp or you're out of the camp. So either you live by the rules or you don't live. You're out of the camp. So it was a stark reminder of me of the grace that comes and the majesty that comes with the instructions that He gave us, and the desire to have us near Him.
When you said that, I have to think, either your name's in the book or it's not in the book. And it's up to you, because you're the only one that has the authority to take your name out of the book. So, and they were the only ones that had the authority to bow to that calf.
Yes.
So they're no longer there.
They're no longer there.
But that's a whole long other teaching as well.
Yes.
So we won't
Yes,
go
it is.
there. Did you have? I didn't. You didn't say much tonight. You're
I
kind of
was
quiet.
just
You're just sitting
listening.
there enjoying it.
I sure was.
Ladies and gentlemen, we certainly appreciate your time, your patience. We absolutely appreciate everything you do. Don't forget to hit those like buttons, the share buttons. You know, pass this around because this stuff's important and it needs to be out there. Until next time, have a blessed week. Good night, everyone.